I'm Austin.
I'm Duncan.
I'm Bryce.
And on the mind this week, we have the upset of 2016.
I think we're all a little upset.
A little?
That's a great title.
I thought so too. Of course, we're talking about the presidential election of 2016, in which Donald Trump pulled the upset and won out against Hillary Clinton. And we're going to talk about why that is and what's going to happen from there. First off, let's just go ahead and get to the obvious. All the polls seem to have been wrong.
Entirely wrong,
Yes.
in fact. Yeah.
Entirely wrong. There were a few experts that claimed Trump was going to win as early as September. One, Alan Lichtman, I think, a professor. He's noted for correctly guessing for the past 30 years, is it?
Correct. And there was also basically an AI program that actually monitored social media engagement on Twitter and Facebook that also, based on people's interactions with the pages of Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump and content relevant to them, actually did predict that Donald Trump would win. And that's actually a really interesting new technology because it also predicted all of the primaries correctly, unless I'm mistaken. So it's got a very good record as opposed to polling right now.
Dang. That polling definitely didn't guess that Trump was going to flip 5 states. So let's just get right down to it. What went wrong? What exactly didn't the polls get to? What was the unknown factor?
So, first off, let's look at the ones that weren't actually flips but were swing states. Okay. Florida and Ohio. Well, Florida was almost, even in the traditional polling, it was a dead match. It was well within the polls' margin of error. Everyone knew Florida was going to be very, very close. Ohio, for the several weeks prior to the election, had looked as if it was going to go to Trump, and North Carolina had kind of flip-flopped back and forth a little bit. The big upsets were Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, all of which looked to be very solidly in Mrs. Clinton's camp prior to.
Pennsylvania, in particular, I'm kind of surprised swung in Trump's favor.
Correct. Now, what seems to have been missed there was the amount of support that he had among not just, blue collar whites were, of course, his target demographic. But what really happened that people are seeming to think swung this election was that he did better among women than anyone expected him to, and specifically white college-educated women.
Yeah, I think that surprised everybody. It definitely surprised me when I saw the percentages. He polled 49% of college-educated white women.
Right, which was still a little bit worse than Mitt Romney performed in 2012, but by the same token, he was able to get out enough of the blue-collar, white, male and female vote to make up for that. And interestingly, the other demographic where Hillary did not blow him out nearly as badly as anyone thought she would was among millennials, where she did about 55%, he did about 37%, and then the rest of the voting was split roughly between Gary Johnson and Jill Stein.
That's only 8%.
Right.
I was hoping it'd be larger, honestly.
As was I, but the fact remains that it wasn't a blowout for Mrs. Clinton.
Right, well, that doesn't surprise me as much. I think our generation is kind of jaded with career politicians.
A little bit, but our generation also probably dislikes Donald Trump more than just about anyone else. So I have to admit, I was expecting that to motivate a larger rush of millennials to Mrs. Clinton.
I will say that Trump seems to stand for just about everything millennials hate, at least his speeches. Anyway, the upset states, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. I remember we were talking in the group chat, and as soon as it came to those states down to the wire, we just couldn't believe what we were seeing.
Yeah, and especially Pennsylvania. I recall you and I were kind of going back and forth on that. He's not going to win Pennsylvania, is he? No, there's no way. A couple minutes later, he's pulling ahead, she's pulling ahead. It was an interesting night, if nothing else.
All right, I didn't get to sleep until very late.
Neither did I.
I was working, because I work third shift, and there are 27 televisions, most of which are tuned to news stations, and so it was in my face for 8 hours all night.
And you had to be cordial about
Trump
it.
Trump wins. Actually, there are several people crying in the gym.
Wow.
Really?
Yeah. One gentleman who is homosexual, he came in and yelled, "Well, we're effed," and like to where like everybody in the gym could hear. I don't know, kind of upset about that. But then later he's on the ab machine, and then I look at him, and he just starts crying. I'm sorry, I'm laughing at him, but it was kind of a humorous sight. Somebody on the workout machine, and then they start crying. But everyone's upset. Other people, in fact, cried as well the following night.
I've seen a lot of conservative sites making fun of that, actually.
Okay, I'm sorry. I don't mean to laugh. I'm not laughing at him. I mean, I kind of am, but I don't mean to be.
Right.
But let's move on.
You're laughing at the image of someone crying. Okay.
This is
let's move
getting
on.
worse and worse for me.
Let's just move on. And
Speaking of extreme emotion, we're going to talk about the protests. Are they still occurring?
Yeah, I mean, so far we've had, and it's mostly in large urban centers, obviously. As I was telling Austin just before we started recording, I know there was one planned in Chicago either for today or tomorrow, ditto San Francisco. There have, of course, been very consistent protests occurring in New York, where, of course, Trump Tower, Trump's international headquarters, is based. People have been protesting as close to that as they can legally get. Yeah, so I mean, there have just been protests, and of course, as we usually see with protests in the 21st century, those sentiments are being carried over into the digital space on social media. I don't know how many people I've seen post the, hashtag not my president stuff, or, the sentiments that they're never going to recognize Donald Trump as legitimate.
It's kind of nice to see that about someone other than Obama.
It is, on the other hand, and I mean, I accept the argument that the Trump supporters were definitely prepared to do this. America really should be better than this.
Oh, absolutely.
We should be.
But Bryce, do you have a point?
Yeah, I do agree. First off, he is all of our president. But I wanted to get back to polling real quick.
Okay.
Just because you asked, how did this happen? How were all the polls wrong? I have two theories myself. The first one, perhaps less likely, but in the same way that all of the media outlets named Hillary Clinton the winner in the primaries before the voting process was even final, WikiLeaks showed all the emails regarding that, and so it wasn't necessarily rigged, but it was definitely the DNC definitely
Stack the cards in her favor.
Yes. Good. That's a good way of putting it. So one theory is that her or the DNC and the media did the same thing with polling data to perhaps make it seem like she's going to win, sort of like the bandwagon thing.
Effect, yeah.
The other theory is that, and I got this from a gentleman on Facebook, a video that was shared several times. I cannot remember his name for the life of me. He was a British fellow. He talked about how the left won the social war, and how if you think anything different than immigrants are okay, we need to save refugees, LGBT, they should have the right to marry, things like that. If you think anything different than that, then you're automatically wrong, and all of your beliefs are wrong, and you're just a bigot, and things like that. And so people were afraid to express support for Trump and Pence because of that, and that's why it was such a huge upset.
If I can't extrapolate on that,
yes,
that's something I was thinking this entire time. Is you have all these liberals on social media bashing how people feel, and then it gets to the election day, and people are a little jaded about being called racist, even though they haven't said anything. They get put into Hillary's basket of deplorables, and they remembered that, and they voted against it.
Yeah, and I definitely concur with that evaluation, certainly because people also had sort of this guilt by association thing going on. Trump said some things that were very questionable during the campaign. Some of his supporters have said some things that are just downright racist, sexist, anti-Semitic especially.
Not only said, but done.
True. But the problem is you can't, let's say someone gets onto sort of the Donald Trump bandwagon because they legitimately thought that his economic plan was going to bring jobs back to the United States. I think that person has maybe an outdated way of looking at things, but that's certainly no reason to suggest that person is a racist or a bigot in some way. The left has taken on this very guilt by association idea.
It's polarized. It really is. And the right's actually just about as guilty.
Oh yeah,
If we're
without
gonna be
doubt.
honest.
Without doubt.
It is ironic that being on the left, where and I do put myself in this category, and I'm guilty of this myself. We think that we're some sort of protectors or knights, saving the LGBT community or minorities from the bullies, and then we in turn become the bullies by guilt by association, everything that we were just talking about.
Right. I also want to point out that a man I deeply respect, very successful. He was talking to me. He said, "This is about as divided as I've ever seen America." He's an older gentleman. He said, and if there's any way I need to point that out, it's Mark Kirk losing his reelection. He was a moderate Republican, and he lost to Tammy Duckworth.
Yeah,
And I thought that was right on point.
and I know at least two of us in this room were very disappointed about. I was incredibly disappointed.
I
in
was
that.
too, especially since he had spoken out against Trump. I think he did everything that he should have done right, and he still lost
by a massive margin.
by a massive margin.
I was moderately disappointed.
Still disappointed though. I
Yes.
mean,
Yeah, I'm disappointed too. And I know a lot of people are going to be kind of shocked that Bryce and I are disappointed about that. We like moderates. We really do. Well, at least I do. I don't know how Bryce.
I like people who will compromise.
Exactly. That's something our country is missing right now. We've had a deadlocked Congress since, the Obama's first 2 years.
Well, in the first 2 years,
He
keep
had
in
a
mind he did have
supermajority.
a very very strong majority. Since 2014, he's had neither house aligned with him.
Right, and if there's the House or the Senate, they've just been obstructing him for quite a long time. Okay. Let's go ahead and get on to the riots or protests. There are a few instances where it could be considered a riot. There have been reports of police officers and protesters alike being injured. I've seen videos where police have been telling them it's at least an unlawful assembly. So, you want to get into that, Bryce? You probably know more about it than I do.
I do not. I will say I've seen a lot of this meme going around on Facebook. It's a picture of people protesting in New York, and the caption is, "This is what happens when you give children trophies for participating." Now, I don't really see that connection at all. But my argument is that no, this is what happens when you give people in a democracy disdain for the current leadership, or I guess not the current leadership.
I also want to point out that this probably would have happened with Hillary winning too. Maybe not in urban centers, but
if Hillary Clinton was elected, if Donald Trump lost, the riots or protests would have been so much worse. They would have been so much more violent. They would have, in my opinion, these aren't done yet, but I think that would last longer.
I definitely think that Trump's supporters probably a little more well armed. I want to look at the militia groups that were kind of covered right before the election.
The 3%er groups and whatnot.
Right, that was kind of terrifying to watch, actually. I didn't like his, "I'll concede if I win." I was like, okay, that doesn't make sense. And his protesters took that to heart. They really thought, well, this election's going to be rigged. I better get ready for a revolution.
So, I guess my thoughts on this just follow along the lines of America, what are you doing? I mean, we have in this country pretty much the longest lasting democracy in the form that we have it in the world, and we are one of the most stable nations on earth. And quite frankly, a lot of that is based on the assumption that win or lose, when an election occurs, you do accept the results of that election. And
it's a peaceful transition of power.
It's a peaceful transition, and people point to the Bush-Gore election in 2000. That election was so incredibly close that yes, there really was a legitimate question as to who won that election. That is not the case with Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton.
It was clear cut.
Donald Trump, love him or hate him, clearly did win this election. You're not doing yourselves any favors by devoting your energies to protesting Trump. All you're doing is dividing the country further instead of doing constructive things that you can actually implement to work your changes into the future.
And I will point out, on a converse side, the people that have been screaming about Obama for the past 8 years now saying we need to unite behind Trump.
Yeah.
I want to call you out as a hypocrite right now. No one's buying that act. It's not okay to be saying that. You should have accepted Obama, and you're seeing the reverse of what happens when you've been screaming about you're not liking your president. Now they're not going to like yours.
I have a family member who recently was talking to me about how Obama has lost several jobs in the United States. I mean, like millions or thousands or millions. I forget what she said. Either way, it's wrong because we're currently in the midst of the longest job growth streak in the history of the
74
country.
months?
Yes. So anyway, she shared something on Facebook that said, I lived through Obama. Now you'll live through Trump. And it just she just complains about Obama so much, and it's like, you know, I had to listen to you complain about Obama for 8 years. Now you're gonna listen to me complain about Trump.
See, complaining about a president is one thing, because that's one of the things that makes America great, is we
Freedom
do
of
have
speech.
freedom of speech and freedom of civil discourse. That's a completely different thing. But when you're actually questioning the legitimacy of a president, or president-elect in this case, simply because you do not like that person, as Austin correctly points out, the current Trump supporters did with Barack Obama for 8 solid years, and as I'm sure the people who now dislike Donald Trump, you know, to that degree, are going to do for the next 4 years at least. My concern becomes that, is this the new standard that we've set for ourselves? Is this what happens every time someone is elected president of the United States?
Right. I remember being back in, was it 8th grade when Obama was elected?
Probably would have
The
been
first
about
time.
right for
Yeah.
you.
I was a conservative back then. Hardcore. I lived in Arkansas. If that says anything, I'm sure it does. I remember people talking, oh, well, we don't have to worry about Obama. It won't be long. And I remember the implications of that. I was like, wow, that's kind of crazy. You're not even going to give him a chance. There's a reason he was elected. He probably has good ideas, and I didn't dare say it at the time, but I'm saying it now. Trump, it's harder to say it now because I dislike some of the things that have come out of his mouth.
Well, Trump has ideas that align with a majority of the American voting populace, as we put it out.
Maybe
there.
not the social
majority,
issues,
but
okay, Bryce, we'll get to that in a minute. He does have solid ideas in his 100-day plan that I think would benefit America greatly. He also has some disastrous things that I hope don't get through, but we have to give it a shot.
Yeah, I mean, you know, as I've just said, you know, love him or hate him, he's now the president of the United States.
Got to get behind him.
You don't even necessarily need to get behind him in terms of supporting him on policy, but
It would have been the same thing with Hillary. If she got in, I would have been hawking her the entire time.
right, exactly. Criticize them on policy, but recognize the fact that this person has won in a fair democratic process.
if I can get real quick back into the protest, but I'm also kind of talking about the popular versus electoral vote. These people who are protesting, I don't think are necessarily questioning the legitimacy of a Trump presidency, but are rather expressing a disliking for the electoral college process. We didn't come up with the electoral college. We didn't vote on this. It was decided for us a long, long time ago.
I'm going to give you the same argument I give for taxes, laws, and everything else. We should have known them by now. Ignorance of it isn't an excuse to protest it after the fact. If you had a problem with it before, you should have said something.
I mean, in my defense, I've had a problem with the electoral college my entire life, and I've been saying I'm okay with popular vote this whole time. But maybe these people weren't, but it's not really necessarily a cause to protest for it.
It's just they want to
2 years
abolish
ago.
it now that it's relevant to them.
Right.
And go ahead.
So my big concern is that for the longest time, I guess I shouldn't say for the longest time, for about a week prior to the election, there was this big concern that Trump might actually win the popular vote. But Hillary's supporters were, 100% sure that she was going to win the electoral college.
That they couldn't get through the blue wall.
They were not concerned because of the blue wall. And I noticed that they're only against the electoral college now. Like people like Bryce who have a problem with the electoral college and have had for a long time.
That's
Bryce,
fine.
I disagree with you, but
That's fine.
I respect your views. People who change simply because, people who are in favor of it one day because it's going to deliver them the candidate they like and then change their views the next day because it didn't. you're not actually having a philosophical or ideological problem with the Electoral College. You're just being hypocritical.
Exactly, and we keep bringing that word up, but it applies.
Yeah, and unfortunately it would have applied on either side because the Trump supporters would have done exactly the same.
Yeah, and they won't own up to that, I don't think.
Well, they don't have to because it's now in a hypothetical universe.
So,
Exactly.
a buddy of mine, well, not necessarily a friend, but somebody I went to high school with, he is a Trump supporter, and he's been. I keep talking about things I see on Facebook. This is why
Miller.
what's that? Oh no, just
Okay.
a different fellow. He keeps sharing these things, why we need the Electoral College, and it's, their videos. He shared 3 now on Facebook, and I see each one, and I take the screenshot of Donald Trump's tweet where he says the Electoral College is a disgrace to democracy or something like that, something along those lines, and then I post the picture in the comments section. Because he said it was in 2012 after Mitt Romney lost to Obama. He's talking about he just doesn't like the Electoral College either, and it's funny.
Well,
That's how he wants.
I did not mean to imply that Donald Trump isn't hypocritical. I'm sorry if that came across like that.
All right, let's move it on, or we'll stick on how we feel about Donald Trump, and that'll be later. We finally got to the point. Duncan, you got your rant ready? Because we're going to talk about Priebus and Bannon.
Okay.
And-
Can we at least start off with the good one? The one that
Yeah.
we don't hate, please?
Okay, well, relative. Let's start with Priebus. I'm sure that's who you're talking
Yeah,
about.
that is who I'm talking about.
I wasn't shocked. A little disappointed. Not shocked. I don't know much about him, but I do know that he's condoned Trump's statements. And I understand being the head of the Republican National Committee, he had to be behind Trump. He had a contract with him. I still wish I would have heard something condemning certain statements. I understand, though. Go ahead.
So, okay, on Priebus, I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a second because you guys know I love doing that.
It's okay.
The chairman of the Republican National Committee is in a very delicate position, especially when you've got 17 separate people running for office. If you start giving condemnations or praise of, individual things that they say or of them as people.
Let me clarify. After he won the nomination.
Okay, all right, that's fair.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, my point is that he did have a very fine balancing line to walk here.
And not to mention, Trump always had to make himself the victim. And if Priebus would have said anything, oh, it's rigged against me.
Right. And here again, we have to recognize that the people who voted Republican this year, some of them are traditional Republicans, many of them are not. There was this very big influx of populist voters who came specifically for Trump. And on the other side of that, you have your party leadership. You have your Mitt Romneys, your Paul Ryans, people who have been in the Republican Party for many years who constitute its leadership. So I'm going to give him credit for walking a very delicate, very fine line in this election. And coming out of it, I would say about as well as anyone probably could have for the circumstances.
I am going to thoroughly disagree. I feel like he did the same thing Paul Ryan always does. He wanted his cake and he wanted to eat it too. I feel that you have to take a stance against people that are going to condemn your fellow Americans. You have to. We can't have violence amongst ourselves. We have to come together and work together, or else our country will fall apart.
By the same token, in his professional capacity as the head of the Republican National Committee, once the voters who had voted Trump in the primaries had made their decision, his job, his professional position, was to do what he could to support Trump. And I don't envy him that position because I'd hate it myself.
I guess we'll see what he says after the Trump presidency.
Yeah.
I'll be interested to hear that. I'm going to put that in my calendar.
Don't we all have the end of the Trump presidency in our calendars?
Yeah, the end of the world.
Oh, wow.
Okay, I'm not going to go there. I don't think that's going to happen. Do you have anything to say about Priebus?
No, I actually don't know much about these two fellows. I will say, however, who knows? The Cubs did win the World Series.
And Biff won the presidency. But I'm sure you've heard of Steve Bannon at the very least.
Oh yeah,
And-
he's just a crazy person.
Okay, that's one way to say it. Another way is to say he's heavily involved in Breitbart.
Co-founder and, if I'm not mistaken, producing director.
Wonderful. They've had some pretty insane headlines. Very alt-right leaning. In fact, he came out and said it's the platform for the alt-right voice, if I remember right. Which is funny because Donald Trump's always been saying that he has no connection with the alt-right, even though the KKK endorsed him.
And yet they voted for him in substantive numbers.
That we don't talk about that, Duncan.
What-
Okay,
what's
we are.
I was going to say, then what are we doing here?
I'm sure he doesn't want us to.
What's the connection to Bannon and Alex Jones?
They're just very similar figures.
Oh, okay.
Same intellectual property or lack thereof.
Then never mind.
Yeah. So, yeah, I'm going to just kind of start on here.
Hold on.
Okay.
I will say, in Trump's defense, he might have felt like he had to bring Bannon on in some capacity. And if that was the case, I'm glad he put Priebus ahead of him in rank. That was wise on his part if he planned it that way.
Well, he has said that it's going to be a joint partnership between the two, but if, as you're suggesting, he brought Bannon on for strategic purposes, he would be sort of obliged to say that and then perhaps not really follow through with it.
Okay, well, you know what? Go ahead. I will put you on a timer.
Okay. So, Steve Bannon is not someone who should be involved in our federal government, quite frankly. He's a propagator of insane conspiracy theories, making claims that he can't back up with anything even remotely resembling evidence. You know, I don't care whether you would agree or disagree with his political positions. The simple fact is that many of the specific claims he makes simply do not have a rational backing to them. People complain about the media as if it's some big sort of evil conglomerate. And is the media perfect? Absolutely not. But at least the media, you know, as a whole, and again, the media is made up of a bunch of different small and large companies. At least the media does not outright concoct things out of whole cloth and then proceed to present them as fact. Steve Bannon, exactly in the form of Alex Jones, does exactly that. The spreading of misinformation is not a crime, nor should it be, but it should not be endorsed by a federal level position within the White House. And frankly, if we had half a brain as a collective in this country, Steve Bannon would sort of be our village idiot.
Well put. I will say that spreading of misinformation about an individual with intent to harm, blah, blah, blah.
Correct.
Libel.
Can be libel or slander depending on the format in which it's presented.
By the way, President-elect Trump wants to strengthen those laws.
That may deserve its own episode, Civil Liberties under the Trump administration.
At least the Second Amendment will be fine.
Let's see about that.
Well, at least we're gonna get Bryce in here with this one. Let's talk implications.
Oh, okay.
The depressed tone you took there.
I mean, it's like where to even begin. What was I talking about earlier? Oh, the banks. So those of you who know me know that I was a huge Bernie Sanders fan, and I was very upset. I mean, yeah, when he lost, but that when he lost, big banks were never again a topic of discussion. I thoroughly believe that.
I think, not to contradict you, I believe Clinton kind of half latched onto that.
Yeah, she did. She did present a much more mild view of increased regulation of Wall Street.
Clinton mild, really.
Okay, well, anyway, he wants to deregulate the banks a lot, essentially undo what President Obama did in 2010 with the, what was it called, Dodd-Frank law and the Volcker rule. Yeah. Basically, so you remember when the housing market crashed because big banks were doing hedge funds and things like that? Well, that's I mean, that part's going to happen again, which could potentially result in another market crash, but could potentially also not. Um,
Flip a coin, I guess.
yes.
Let's not look
it's
at polling data because it's
dangerous.
obviously not reliable.
It's very dangerous. It scares me. I mean, we're going to be looking at another Big Short, in my opinion.
Okay.
Okay, so my primary concerns in the Trump administration take two basic forms. A lot of people have hawked foreign policy as something that's going to be a huge problem. Honestly, Trump is sufficiently isolationist because he doesn't really understand the world particularly well. I don't think that foreign policy is going to be the disaster under the Trump administration. World War III is not on the table here. My two big concerns are first economics and second civil liberties, which again, we've kind of already touched on the civil liberties, the expansion of slander and libel laws. Economics, in my opinion, Donald Trump has a handful of good ideas complemented by a basket full of very bad ideas.
Deplorable ideas, you might say. A basket full of deplorable ideas.
No, just bad ideas.
Are you sure it's not just about 25%?
So anyway, he has already come out against both the TPP, and TTIP, which, in my opinion, are both deals that we should be involved in.
TTIP?
That's a transatlantic partnership that involves the European Union.
Okay.
And very similar to the TPP in some ways. He has also come out in favor of a 35% tariff on Mexican goods with a 45% tariff on Chinese goods. Combine all of these with, especially when you consider the idea of abrogating the NAFTA Accord, you really do run the risk of a major hyperinflationary spiral in which the cost of consumer goods goes up, the amount of investment that would be needed in the United States to build factories that are relevant in the modern era to produce these consumer goods goes up exponentially. I mean, we're talking about a massive, massive financial liability across all sectors. I mean, we're not just talking about manufacturing. We're talking about every industry that's connected to manufacturing in any way, shape, or form. And if that doesn't go exactly right, the global supply chain, which Trump doesn't seem to understand that products are no longer made in a single factory. They're made in dozens or hundreds of factories across the globe and then assembled in a single factory. The global supply chain that we currently rely on to create the products that we buy every day could very well be interrupted in a very significant way. I think that's why we're seeing now Australia turning away from us in trade and going to Japan and China. China negotiating free trade deals with several other nations independently. So economics is my big concern here with Donald Trump.
I think that's actually kind of a funny point because that's why everybody voted for him.
Well, I didn't say I thought that they were right, mind you.
Right. I looked at his 100-day plan. I especially like his stance on corruption in the government. I don't think he's going to get anything done. Particularly, I like his term limit idea. I don't think he's going to get it done.
It's funny because some representative from Congress was talking like, yeah, we're going to get all behind Donald Trump's ideas and we're going to get as much through as we can, which is pretty much everything. They're like, okay, well, what about term limits? And like, well, term limits isn't one of the primary objectives.
I think that was McConnell, I bet.
I think so. Continue, sorry.
Okay, that's okay. Where was I? I do like that he backed off the wall a little bit. I am happy to see that he's not talking about social issues as much. I will say that. That calmed me down quite a bit because that was what I was up in arms about. Don't like his stance on education, and for the sole reason that it's talking about funding religious schools, and I'm pretty sure the government has no authority to be giving to religious entities.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Unless the only way that could be done is if a church founded a school as a separate legal entity that was not religious in nature. In that case, the law would be quite gray on that.
All right. Well, I just hope that he sticks to things the government should be doing. I hope he doesn't have a severe impact on the Supreme Court. I really hope he doesn't get impeached because I can only imagine Mike Pence will be just astronomically worse in terms of civil liberty and progress that we've made for certain groups over the years under Obama. I'm curious to see how his immigration plan is going to go. He says he's gonna get rid of 3 million on his first. What was it?
First year, or was
Year?
that for his first 2 years?
I could have sworn it was a lot sooner than that. I think. Well, we'll see what happens. I would have to look that up. I am going to post. I'm going to put a link below our video with his 100-day plan there, so you can take a look at it while we're talking. It's not as horrible as I thought it'd be. That being said, there are things that I wish were changed, but I guess that's the point of politics. You don't always get what you want. So let's just see, I guess. I think we're all disappointed.
I have a little bit more to talk about his. I don't know how I thought this was going to go, but I thought it'd be a little bit different. I wanted to talk a little bit about his trade ideas as well. Now, he's against the TPP and, what would you say, TANPIP? TATIP. Which, I am as well, but for different reasons. He's against it because this is free trade in the sense that it doesn't benefit America, whereas I'm against it because of environmental reasons and other reasons as well. But he believes that global warming is a conspiracy theory and a myth, but not exactly relevant. Austin, go ahead and pretend to be China for me, and I'll be Donald Trump. Austin, I have a great deal for you. It's going to be the best deal. It benefits America fully. Go ahead and sign right here.
No.
See how that works? Anytime he talks about trade deals that are going to benefit America, that's what's going to happen.
You really captured the spirit of Xi Jinping in your no right there.
Did I hit the accent right? I thought so. I had to check.
And the Oscar goes too.
Right. I was trying to channel my Samuel L. Jackson, but it just didn't come out right.
Who, by the way, said he'd move to Canada.
We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. I've seen a lot of memes about that.
Yep.
Well, there's a lot to talk about with this election. I don't think it would have been much easier to talk about if Clinton had won, to be fair. I think we'd still all be pretty disappointed.
A lot less disappointed.
Roughly the same for me, actually.
Yeah. For different reasons, I would have been roughly the same disappointed.
Yeah.
Where I was at was like, okay, I can accept Hillary as president. I think maybe that's what it was. Like, I had time to digest it and to warm up to the idea to the point where I was like, I'll survive. And then just bam.
That's why at like the end of October, the beginning of November, I was in such a bad mood. It was just like, wow, these are both horrible for me.
One of them will be the president.
Right. I have to, and part of me was in denial, but then I said, well, looking at trends, I'm not going to get my way. Still going to vote for Johnson, just hope to get the Libertarians to take over the Republican Party base, and didn't really work out. So I guess I'm just not sure what I wanted, and I don't think it was even on the table.
Did Johnson make it to 5%?
Nationwide, I believe he made it to about 4%.
Oh,
I don't think it's
bummer.
like completely tallied up, every single vote yet, but
yeah.
It's pretty.
But I mean,
he's going to jump his
but
percent.
but considering that he polled about 1% in 2012, I mean that's a 300% increase over his performance last time. So I mean that's not inconsiderable by the same token.
Right. Still. Well, I think that about wraps it up without getting into depressing.
Real quick, there is just kind of one finishing thought I want to throw out there, and it's more about the election process than it is about either Trump or Clinton. I posted something on Facebook about this, and I think it kind of fell flat. But during this election, and this has been a trend in recent elections as well, we've seen people campaigning for the presidency of the United States as if they were going to be kings for 4 years, as if they can do absolutely anything, as if they can, in Donald Trump's case, effectively reverse time and take America back to how it was in 1958. That's a mindset I think we really need to get out of because, quite frankly, presidents don't have that power, and it only sets, electorates up for disappointment and for fury like we're seeing now when that belief is in the public mind because, the people who voted for Donald Trump, they want him to do what he said he's going to do. They want, the carrier plant in Indianapolis, Indiana, not to move to Monterrey, Mexico. They want the wall to go up over the southern border. And by the same token, the people who voted against Donald Trump are, acting as if this is the end of the world, as if he's suddenly going to restructure the entire, societal framework of the United States. Presidents don't have this power, and people need to recognize that and actually work within the framework of the constitutional republic that we have to ensure that it stays that way. Because if you keep thinking that way long enough, eventually the way we govern is going to catch up. The Congress is not going to have the mandate of the people to check the executive branch. Ditto with the judicial branch.
It's true. We just have to keep a closer eye on that. Don't really know what else to say. Well, unless Bryce has something.
Maybe, I guess Trump does have, House and Senate are majority Republican. Judicial branch, he'll be appointing somebody, and maybe appointing several people who will be right-leaning. So he does have, he's still not a king, like you said, but he does have a lot of power, and a lot of his ideas will be able to come through since he's so supported in the other branches. If I can say anything, vote for people who promise compromise. I think that's what our country needs. Not blue, not red, but purple. Okay, I'm done.
Well, I think that's all that's on the mind this week. Tune in next time.